Kilimanjaro, 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 Mimambe Kusana.
In the summer of 2003, I went to Africa to climb Mount Kilimanjaro and see the Serengeti. I was born in the Himalayas, and mountains are second nature to me, but I've always been afraid to go to Africa. Perhaps partly because of that fear, I made a personal commitment to visit Tanzania and try to climb Kili by my 50th birthday. The trip that I took with my daughter Briana, my niece Christina and her husband Michael, and my friend Peter was soul-quenching, more complete and more satisfying than my best expectations. This movie is my effort to record those memories. I had trouble believing that we were really going to Africa until we flew over the River Nile. But the trip over was entirely uneventful except for an initial delay at O'Hare while they searched my baggage because I share a name on a terrorist list. I think that made Peter a lot more nervous than it made me because he was afraid they'd search his bag and take away his bear spray. Peter was definitely the most wound up. The rest of us just read or slept or wondered about Africa and maybe worried about whether or not we were prepared enough for the trip. As it turned out, landing at Kilimanjaro Airport on a warm equatorial night was exactly as I imagined it would be.
Well, we made it to Africa, and may I say, right on time.
Yeah.
David Thompson, world's biggest tourist.
The mosquitoes are coming.
Saw one.
Customs was trivial and all our bags arrived intact, and a few probably unnecessary dollars got them out to the van that was waiting for us from our travel agency, Zara International. Watching the guys tie the bags on top of the van took me right back to my childhood in Pakistan. It was an unbelievable feeling to finally be in Africa. And we spent the 40-minute trip to Moshi from Kilimanjaro Airport just absorbing the fact that we were finally there. When we did make it to the Springlands Hotel, we were happy at how beautiful it was. But we were tired, and we didn't spend much time before we went to bed. I woke up pretty early the next morning to go outside and take a look around. I was delighted at what a beautiful hotel the Springlands is. Once you get inside the compound walls, the dirt and the poverty and the disorganization of Africa go away. The staff is wonderful, the grounds are immaculate. Every one of us said we would be happy to spend an entire week there. We had a mountain to climb though, and from the front of the Springlands Hotel, you could see the top of Kilimanjaro, with the glaciers so high up in the clouds that they looked like just another cloud formation. 5,895 meters, 19,341 feet. It was hard to even imagine being at the top. It was sobering to see Kibo so high in the clouds, but it was exciting to think that we'd get the chance to try to climb it.
There's the hut.
There it is right there.
There it is.
Yay!
Okay, proof that we all at least started. We're leaving Springlands and headed toward Moshi.
In Moshi, we picked up our guide Godless and then a bunch of porters that just seemed to be cobbled together on the spot, and headed out in our van toward the north side of the mountain at the border with Kenya, where the Rongai route begins. From Moshi to Rongai is several hours along a very primitive road. It's only paved for the first few miles. The north side of Kilimanjaro doesn't get much water during the dry season, and we had to choose between opening the windows and eating a lot of dust, or leaving the windows closed and savoring the funk of 12 sweaty Africans who didn't seem to use much water any time of year. The Rongai route is the least used of all the hiking routes up Kilimanjaro because it is so remote. And by the time we got to the start, it really did feel like civilization was a world away.
Okay, we've reached the trailhead. This is the Nalamaru or Rongai route. We got here by traveling a very beat up, dusty kind of road. Even the littlest traffic on it stirs up this very fine dust that gets into everything.
We unloaded our stuff and the porters packed it all into assorted baskets and duffel bags held together with twine. We took little more than a humorous and cursory glance at the warning signs, since there was absolutely nothing we could do about it, and set out. The first mile and a half or two of our hike up the mountain was disappointingly dry and dusty and windy until we reached the forest zone, which on the north side of the mountain is only about 2 miles wide.
Okay, we are at picnic site number 2, although it's the first one we got to because our porter went extremely fast.
Yeah, and walked for 45 minutes after he said it would be 15.
And the road was extremely dusty. I would say we each came up with about 1/8 an inch of dust. But it's starting to get prettier finally. Here, hold it up one more time.
The porters caught up with us at lunch and we shared our leftovers with them. They never turned down anything to eat. Eventually the forest thins out into a heather and heath zone, which is one of a half a dozen or so climate zones that you pass through as you climb Kilimanjaro. We could see our elevation gain by looking out at the Kenya plains to the north, and I could also feel the elevation in my level of exertional effort. It was a little disconcerting to be feeling the altitude already, because the first camp, at a little over 9,000 feet, is not even halfway up the whole mountain. We made the first campsite well before dark, and the porters had already set up our tents for us. We shared the campsite that night with a German group who was taking a slightly different route, and that was the only time on the north side of the mountain that we saw any group besides ourselves. In the afternoon air, clouds drifted past Moenzi to our southeast, intermittently obscuring and revealing it. The main cone of Kibo was mostly obscured, but every once in a while we could see the top poking through the clouds. Dinner was in the mess tent, and the hot meat that we'd been promised turned out to be from an animal that had apparently lived a very hard life and died of old age. Christina felt faint for a few minutes, but generally speaking we had an uneventful evening, went to bed early and slept well, except for Peter, who sat in his tent with his can of bear spray, bolt upright, fully prepared for an attack by either Al-Qaeda or a wild animal.
It's morning on day 2. We had a pretty good night. I slept on and off and then woke up Briana about 4 o'clock in the morning. She claims, not likely to be true. There are 9 Germans here also, but they're taking a 5-day route, so this will be the last night that we camp with them. Morning. That's the mountain, as you can see it from our campsite. The porters cook everything inside the tent. We're having sausage and scrambled eggs this morning. The sun is just picking up the snow at the top of the mountain.
In the morning all the clouds were gone and we had a perfect view of the Kibo Cone, which is the last 5,000 feet of Mount Kilimanjaro. The northern ice fields take on a wonderful orange glow in the morning sun, as the sun hits the top of the mountain first and makes its way down. I don't remember a more beautiful sunrise. I just sat there and watched, transfixed, as the sunlight made its way down Kibo and off to the east across the saddle, down Moenzi as well.
Our set of tents is over on the edge here. Just looking around the campground, the toilet. non-flush. The hut, most of the campgrounds have a little hut that's used sort of for emergencies, but not usually for sleeping in. Kilimanjaro. Today we walk straight up toward Kilimanjaro, and then we take a left when we get a couple thousand feet higher, and we go over about halfway to Moenzi, and then the following day we camp at the foot of Moenzi, which is a smaller volcano to the east of Kibo, the main volcano. Then Sunday morning we walk back across the saddle this way, and we camp up near the Kibo huts. If I take the perspective from our tent and I look out the other way toward the plains, we're looking approximately north and now turning around toward the east. So this is all Kenya in this direction. Looks like the sun's just getting ready to peek up over the clouds which sit down over the plains. The porters work like crazy. We can't believe the bags they carried up the mountain. Several of them nearly buckled under the weight. You may recognize that jacket if you're familiar with me. They looked a little cold.
After breakfast, we packed up our rather messy tent and headed out along the trail. The second day was a mixture of a lot of sunshine and a lot of clouds. When the clouds rolled in, it was misty and cool. In the sunshine, it was quite warm. And every once in a while, we got a great view of Kibo and its glaciers poking through the clouds.
Okay, we're stopped along the way, and this is just to document for Rebecca that I told that man not to go in that cave. He's been in there an hour. He disappeared in there with one of the porters, and we heard a lot of noises. We get hungry out here in the bush. That's all we heard him say.
There's Michael at mile.
Mr. Michael.
Quarter of a mile.
Now that, I carried that this far and then I gave it to that porter to go ahead and carry the last couple hundred yards. I had Sonic too, or I'd have had both loads.
Dad, watch our stuff. Are you leaving your backpack? Hey, sexy. Hey.
You are looking
We picked a
good.
good place to stop. There's cool caves and trees to find.
And here comes God, listen.
Not even breathing hard.
Well, that's,
Breaking a sweat.
I gave him a piggyback the first 500 yards.
He's taking a
Hi, Jim.
time with me.
Hi, Gotti.
How are you?
I'm finished.
No. We're starting now.
Exactly.
Yes. But pole.
Pole. Yeah, we're going pole.
Yeah, no rush.
No rush.
If you want to make it,
Now, another hour to where we turn left?
Yeah.
Okay.
the cave.
Yeah. We're just getting ready to disappear into the clouds. You can tell I'm breathing hard, but I haven't croaked. Excellent. Well, we're about halfway through the second day, and it's been a brutal uphill climb, very stimulating. We walked into the clouds. The path is very level though. It doesn't go up and down a lot, it's pretty much just a level incline up. What I notice about the porters is that they take very short steps, so they're never really bending at the knee much, and I think that's the pole part that helps them carry such huge loads up the mountain. Where I'm like that guy in the book. He was breathing like a buffalo, and that night he passed away. Briana, I've got the camera on you. How was your trip up so far?
Great.
It was?
I'm ready for the top.
Hakuna Matata?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Different flowers. Lots of little yellow guys. It seems like the higher you go, the tinier the flowers are. Cute little white guy on a stalk. Don't know what kind any of these are.
We had a lot of fun walking. Generally speaking, Briana and Peter walked on ahead. I was sort of in the middle, and Christina and Michael were walking with Godlisten at the back. Despite all the goofing around, though, the trail was pretty steep in parts, and I was pretty glad when lunchtime came and I was able to sit and rest for a while. I didn't have much appetite, but I was sure glad to catch my breath.
We're at the top of another brutal climb. We're in the clouds, so it's kind of misting, and I can't video for long because I don't want to get the tape and the video wet. It'll never dry out up here. But we came right through that little gap in the rocks there. Now the trail is leveled off, so we're going to take a short break.
By the time we reached the Kilimanjaro caves at the end of the second day, I was really worn out. I was feeling the altitude, which at the Kilimanjaro caves is approximately 12,000 feet or so. It had been a long day. We'd gotten lost. We'd gone up and down a lot of ridges, and I wasn't sure if I was acclimatizing or if I was just wearing myself out.
We are right before the camps at the end of day 2. It's been a long, tough day. Not a lot of elevation change, but a lot of ups and downs over ridges. Those should be our tents over there by the hut. So we'll be there in just about 2 minutes. Christina, Michael, and Godlisten coming into camp.
At Kilimanjaro, it was encouraging to be so far above the plains where we'd started, but we were too tired to celebrate much. We ate dinner, we got into our sleeping bags, and we slept very, very soundly. In the morning at Kilimanjaro, there was a hard frost. The flowers all formed a little case of ice around them, but as soon as the sun came up, the ice melted, and the flowers started opening up again. The morning mountain air was thin and cold, but very invigorating, and Dictator made sure that he brought us a bowl of warm water every morning to wash up in. From the Kilimanjaro caves, we had a beautiful clear morning view of Kibo off to the west, but our route instead was toward Mwenzi, the lesser volcanic cone to the east of Kibo, right up a steep hill leading away from the Kilimanjaro caves.
That was brutal, wasn't it? We just came up this vicious incline, just about finished me off.
Yeah.
We try to take it real slow, step at a time, and when I want encouragement, I look behind me and I see how much we've gained. I've stopped to rest. If you take it very, very slow, it's tolerable, but it is very difficult for me. That's Mwenzi, of course, in the background. And I think I can pull in here. To give an idea of what it's like. You can see Briana crawling over those rocks in the blue, right behind the porter, and Peter behind her, and then another porter coming along. And the idea seems to be to just take it one step at a time. I find if I think about what it's like to get all the way to the top, it's overwhelming. And I have to just lose my mind if I want to gain any ground. And take a little tiny step at the time. You do get winded, but not know where you're gasping for breath. I found on this stretch, I'm just getting plain tired. My muscles aren't sore. I don't have any blisters. I'm just tired. And I think part of that is probably the way the mountain defeats you mentally as well. It's cold up here, but it's not bitter. When the wind comes out, you feel it. The clouds came out for a while and then they disappeared. So we're climbing in the clear air again. It's very beautiful.
I was amazed at how much I used my trekking poles. They really seemed to make a difference because they brought your arms into play as you were walking up, not just on the steep sections, but even on just a steadily uphill section. It was a real convenience to have the poles there to help you. The Mwenzi Tarn Hut camp sits at the base of Mwenzi, which is the smaller volcano to the east of Kibo. It has a small lake, or tarn, which we used for drinking water, although it didn't really look too sanitary to us. Mwenzi itself is quite rugged, and although it's not as high as Kibo, is seldom climbed because it requires much more technical expertise.
Okay, we're here at, where are we, guys? Yeah, and an unfortunate thing has happened. Hold on, let me take you there, I'll show you. Okay, follow me up. Dad's gonna be annoyed that this isn't good videoing. But he's dead! This is Dad. He didn't quite make it, and see, he's been left for dead. So everyone at work, you were right.
Time of death, 1 o'clock.
The biggest adventure at Mwenzi Tarn Hut camp came when Peter spied a cave that had some crystals way up high on the mountain. He took off without any preparation and gave us some anxious moments waiting for him to come back, but we finally spotted him making his way back after several hours. It was one of those things that turned out okay because he came back safely, but he did give me and Godlisten more than a few extra heartbeats.
So I want you to tell him when you want to go somewhere, it's better to ask us.
We did tell him, and he said Godlisten will say no. Well, we did so much worrying down here. You're sleeping in the outhouse.
Peter's official story is that he went all the way up to the crystals, but didn't bring any souvenirs back. We never did get him to show us anything, so perhaps that's really what happened. I had brought along my Arobi flying disc and decided that the Mwenzi Tarn Hut camp, with its big flat field, would be a great place to try it out. We got the porters to join in, and it was thoroughly enjoyable to watch them at play. A couple of them got very good, although it was obvious that most of them hadn't had the leisure time for games requiring eye-hand coordination.
You expect everybody to be coordinated because they live a hard life and they're well muscled and everything, but the eye-hand coordination is not natural, as you can see right there. However, watch this guy toss it. Very good. You don't feel the altitude here when you're at rest. We're about 14,000 feet. But as soon as you try and do something, like I just walked up to this ledge, which is perhaps 50 or 60 feet above our camp here, you start puffing. And when I'm doing the hiking, what my general plan is to walk slowly enough so that I don't build up a huge deficit. Because once you've built up a deficit, it seems like it's very difficult to recover it.
Okay. They lost Dad's aerobie. Dad could care less, but he feels the need to walk into this freezing cold water and get it.
One particularly excellent toss sent the aerobie into the middle of the Moenzi Tarn. The Moenzi Tarn was our drinking water supply, and we weren't especially anxious to have our somewhat ill and non-swimming African brethren wade in after it, but they were determined to try to fish it out, and gave it the old college try. Nighttime brought extremely strong winds, and the relatively inexpensive family-style tents that we were in began tearing apart. We anchored everything down with rocks as best we could, and settled back for the night, just hoping to make the best of it.
We seem to be sleeping reasonably well. Today was an excellent day. The major entertainment of the day was Sonic's visit up the hill. But except for that, we really didn't have any trouble with the walk. It was long and steep and uphill. But I guess that's what you have to expect if you're going up the big mountain.
Despite the wind, we slept well anyway. But there was never a time again from the Kilimanjaro caves on until we got down onto the south side of the mountain that there wasn't wind noise in the microphone and wind on our faces.
It was an extremely windy night, and Briana's in my tent, which is the one just beyond the one that Michael's walking toward now. Just about blew over. Anyway, we're looking forward to an excellent day. As you look around our campsite here, we can pan over to the Moenzi Tarn itself, this big pond of water. Yesterday, the cooks were playing with the aerobie, and one of them finally threw it into the pond. So one fellow waded out almost all the way till he got there, but the water was too deep, and alas, the aerobie was lost before we got to the Moenzi saddle. It's cold this morning, but it's not as cold as it was yesterday, I don't think. And there's not as much moisture in the air, so the tents didn't have frost on them this morning like they did yesterday. There is some frost on the ground.
The Moenzi Tarn Hut camp sits at about 14,000 feet or so on the northern slopes of Moenzi. It's right on the edge of the Little Barranco, which is a canyon that runs down the northern slope of Moenzi to the forest zone, along with its larger brother, the Great Barranco. Neither of those canyons is very well explored, and along with many other things that we saw along the way, I wish that I could have taken the time to go down into them. On this day, they would have to remain hidden underneath the clouds, because in 24 hours, we were due to be at the top of Africa's highest point.
Well, we've made it this far in one day. We think we're just going to do the whole hike in one day. Just go straight to the top. We've had to carry Dad.
So we start from...
Okay, I just got off God Listens back, and we're ready to climb the mountain. How are you feeling, Christina?
Feeling darn good, actually.
God Listen, how are you doing?
Right, like a lion.
Sonic's turned into Al-Qaeda.
So we are starting from Western Hat, we go keyboard. With the American people, very strong people like lion.
Four American people, one Al-Qaeda. Yesterday.
We paused for a group photo on the northwestern slope of Moenzi, right before we dropped down into the saddle, which is the large plain between Moenzi and Kibo.
It's a beautiful day. Started off a little bit cold, but we're on the second to final piece of our hike and our final day. Looking forward to it.
Coming down off the slopes of Moenzi, we got our first really good view of the saddle between Moenzi and Kibo. We also got our first completely unobstructed view of the Kibo cone, rising 5,000 feet above the plain we were about to cross. The altitude and the lack of moisture make the saddle an alpine desert. The barrenness of the landscape was beautiful in its own way, but it also made judging distances extremely difficult, and I could never guess how far away something or someone was. It seemed like you could be walking on the saddle for a long time, and whenever you turned around to look at Mwenzi or looked forward at Kibo, it was still about the same distance away. Still, I knew the cone of Kibo was growing closer bit by bit, and I felt a growing sense of anticipation, excitement, and a little anxiety, realizing that the part of the mountain that I had waited so many months to climb was almost under my feet.
That's Bri, about half a mile ahead of us. And right now in this whole saddle, since everybody else is behind us, there's just nothing but Briana and Kibo. This is really a fun perspective because you can actually see our trail kind of winding down through here and then going up toward the Kibo huts. We're closing in on lunch as we cross the saddle. This is pretty much what our party looks like, and with the exception of our porters, who are way down the road by now, there isn't anybody on this side of the mountain except for us. We haven't seen anyone for miles and miles coming in from this Mwenzi side. Okay, we're stopped for lunch, smack dab in the middle of the saddle between Mwenzi off to our right and the path that goes up to the Kibo huts. And this is a great place to see what the path looks like. If I can pick it up here on the zoom. We stop at the Kibo huts, which are right in the center of the picture here today, and we rest there for a little bit, perhaps even take a little ambient assisted nap. Then we start out on this path and we go up fairly steep climb to what's called the Hansmeyer Cave, which is approximately this level here. Then we start the very steep scree with all the switchbacks all the way up. A little bit of snow near the top for probably the last hour or so to Gilman's Point. This saddle is just like a moonscape. There are little rocks kind of randomly tossed all over the place. And it's much farther to Mwenzi than you realize. We've been walking for a few kilometers at least, and only now does Mwenzi seem like it's substantially farther away. Okay, well I think we can pretty much say we made it to Kibo Hut, because that's it right there on the left. To say the view from up here is beautiful just doesn't do it justice. And here we are struggling with our 20-pound day packs. And these porters are up here at 4,700 meters. So that's higher than any mountain in the continental United States. Staggering up toward Kibo Hut with their enormous loads. The stuff you walk on is this stuff that they call scree. It's really just like gravel, volcanic debris, I suppose, all kind of broken up, but it's very dusty when it's dry. Peter and Briana are approaching the Kibo Hut. It's hard to completely catch your breath up here, and then once you do catch your breath and you start going again, you feel real bad for the first 100 to 200 yards, and you get a little rhythm going, and it's okay. But I find I'm down to a breath every step, and it's more panting, so it gives you some degree of anxiety for tonight. I suppose we'll have a chance to rest up and let our muscles recover a little bit, and we'll see how we do.
Above the Kibo huts, I only have still images because my video camera stopped working in the cold. We gave the hut manager $5 to let us sleep in the bunks instead of our tents for a short nap before starting the climb. Kibo has a solar-powered cell station, but we couldn't make any phone calls because it wasn't working. We had dinner and settled in for a 2-hour nap. I took some Ambien because I wanted to be as rested as possible, and I thought I was too much on edge to sleep spontaneously. When I look at our faces in these final photos at the Kibo hut before we started the climb, I think there's a little bit of tension on everybody's face. At about 11 p.m. we got up, gathered our gear, which wasn't much more than cameras, snacks, and water, and headed up the mountain. The hours that we spent climbing to the crater rim are difficult to describe. I didn't talk much. I remember the darkness, the endless scree, and extreme fatigue. When we stopped to rest at the Hansmeyer cave about 17,000 feet, I laid down for a couple minutes, but I don't think my pulse ever slowed below 150. In the daylight, you can see how the trail cuts up the mountain. But at night, all you can do is put one foot in front of the other in an endless series of steps until the last few hundred yards when you scramble over some boulders and reach the crater rim at Gilman's Point. At Gilman's Point, Briana seemed pretty relaxed, but I was completely exhausted. Briana asked me if I was ready to continue on to Uhuru Peak, which is another couple hours along the crater rim and about 700 feet higher. In reply, I just started vomiting. I was aware of the gorgeous sunrise, but I didn't have enough energy to take another picture, much less another step. From Gilman's Point on the Moenzi side of the crater rim, all the way around to Uhuru Peak on the south side, seemed like an insurmountable distance to me. If Briana hadn't started walking toward Uhuru, I think I might have just stopped at Gilman's Point. I had come to realize on the long climb up to the crater rim that I didn't have anything to prove to anyone, and that I was climbing Kilimanjaro for myself. Still, Briana was walking on ahead of me, and I didn't have enough energy to have a conversation with her about it, so I just kept taking one step at a time, periodically stopping to rest and lean forward on my walking poles. And then I went over one more ridge, and there was Briana, waiting for me up by the sign. The sign on the crater rim looked exactly like it does in all the pictures. Congratulations, you are now at Uhuru Peak, Tanzania, Africa's highest point. So there I was, standing on Uhuru Peak. My video camera didn't work, but I didn't care. I wish I'd had more to give Briana in celebration, but at that point I was utterly spent, and I knew that there would be time for celebrating later. I stashed a couple rocks in my pocket, and the guide took a photo of us holding Peter's flag. My heart was pounding from the hypoxia, but it was also bursting with pride that Briana had made it to the top with me. Unbeknownst to us, Christina, who had stayed behind with Michael when he started feeling sick at Hansmeyer Cave, had continued up the mountain by herself. She was waiting for us at Stella's Point, between Gilman's Point and Uhuru Peak. We were ecstatic to see her, and amazed at the iron will that let her continue up the mountain without the rest of her original party. We took some photos with Uhuru as the backdrop, and continued down the mountain together. The Kibo hut was way below the clouds when we started down the mountain. We just kept plugging along. It was as hard almost to go down as it was to go up, because you had to brake yourself on the steep slopes. When we turned around and looked above us at the thousands of feet of scree that we'd climbed the night before, it was hard to believe that we actually did it. Back at Kibo, I passed out in my bunk, shivering and incoherent for 2 hours. After my 2-hour nap, I was feeling a lot better. Peter and Michael had gotten sick going up the Kibo cone, but they were feeling better too. So we all set off for the Harambo huts, which are several miles down the Marangu route. The Marangu route is the normal or tourist route, and the walking is easy, but considering that we'd started the day before at Mwenzi Tarn Hut Camp, with only a couple of naps in between, it was still a long day. Officially, we were supposed to sleep in our tents at the Harambo huts, since we'd gone up the Rongai route, and that's what the park authority expects you to do. Harambo hut had incredible luxuries like cell phone service, running water, a porcelain toilet you could sit on, and Coca-Cola, so we decided to add to our sense of luxury by giving the hut manager a few dollars and buying a hut with some empty bunks in it that had mattresses to sleep on.
So here's our mess tent on the final morning. Morning, Michael. And this is a pretty typical table setup. Every morning they bring us some porridge and some hot water and some clean plates, meaning there's no dirt on them. We don't know about the potential bacteria. Right. Toast usually.
Nails or, you know.
Yeah.
And it's not like I haven't scrubbed them.
Our hands are as filthy as they have ever been, and mine are tingly because I accidentally took 2 Diamox in the middle of the night thinking they were aspirin. And this is a fairly typical scene, whether it's a tent or whether it's a hut. There is junk everywhere. All of it is essentially filthy.
Exactly.
The Glamour Queen has her sunglasses on because of the... She's got some swollen eyes, probably from the sun. Briana's making sure her hair is nice and brushed out. She slept the whole entire night with no interruptions, unlike me who had to get up 3 times to pee.
We'd grown to love Godlisten and the Porters. We gave them a generous tip, and we gathered them all together in a group so they could introduce themselves and get a group photo.
My name is Prosper.
You can tell the camera.
Okay. My name is Prosper.
My name is Jim.
My name is Gordon.
My name is Sylvester.
My name is Joel.
My name is Reginald.
My name is Stanislaus, or Dictator.
My name is Frank. Yeah, my name is Godlisten. My name is Ivan.
Okay, and these are all the guys that took us up the mountain and brought us back down. And every day they carried our extremely heavy bags, especially Mr. Malave's, and they did an excellent job, and we are very, very grateful to the boys.
Thank you very much.
Wow, terrific job. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now let's get a picture just of our group. Okay, now I got to get a picture with the regular camera.
We want to song Kilimanjaro in the video.
Yes.
Oh, okay, sing. Oh, they want to sing, Dad. In the
Oh, sing, yes, excellent.
Kilimanjaro, Kilimanjaro, Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro, mlima mrefu sana. Kilimanjaro, Kilimanjaro, Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro, mlima mrefu sana. Na mawenzi, na mawenzi, na mawenzi. Na mawenzi, mlima mrefu sana. Na mawenzi, na mawenzi, na mawenzi. Na mawenzi, mlima mrefu sana. Ewe nyoka, ewe nyoka, ewe nyoka. Ewe nyoka, mbona wanizunguka? Wanizunguka, wanizunguka, wanizunguka. Wanizunguka, wataka kunila nyama. Kunila nyama, kunila nyama, kunila nyama. Kunila nyama, mbona wanizunguka? Kunila nyama, kunila nyama, kunila nyama. Kunila nyama, mbona wanizunguka?
Thank you, Godlisten. Thank you, everybody.
We continued a very relaxing walk down the mountain, talking to each other and reflecting on all the things that had happened to us over the last few days. For me, it was an intensely personal experience that doesn't easily translate either to a diary or to video or to talking about it to other people. Although standing on top of Uhuru Peak was a personal highlight for me, in the end, the richness of the experience wasn't about knocking off a mountain peak. It was more about the process of the experience itself and savoring every moment of doing something that I'd always been afraid to do. I don't think I was physically afraid, although people do die on the mountain. Even the Africans sometimes die of exposure or altitude.
We're looking at a spot where one of the porters died. There were a couple similar kind of monuments right up near the Harambo huts. And Godlisten told me that about 3 weeks ago, two of the porters were coming up, and it started to rain. They weren't dressed well. It was cold. They were obviously pretty near the huts, just didn't quit, and essentially died of cold exposure. Just dropped right on the trail, only, it was probably 300-400 yards from the Harambo huts.
Overall, though, the greatest challenge for me was mental. I probably could have benefited from a more aggressive training regimen, although there are many extremely fit people who still have trouble making it all the way to Uhuru Peak. We met a few groups coming up the trail as we were coming off the mountain, but by and large, even the tourist route did not seem very congested. At times, even the southern slopes of Kilimanjaro seem very remote, and looking back up toward Mwenzi gives you an appreciation for how large this mountain is. Sometimes, though, it didn't seem so remote.
We are absolutely in the middle of nowhere, halfway up Kili, but cell phone, no problem. We talk all we want on the cell phone, except the United States, which is $5 a minute.
But I called you, Katie.
Yes, she did. And she got in her 3 seconds worth.
The south side of Kilimanjaro receives a lot more moisture than the north side, so the vegetation is quite a bit richer on the south side. It's pretty easy to see the different zones as you go through them. I wouldn't say we preferred one side over the other side, though, and it was great to have an opportunity to see both sides of the mountain.
We just entered the forest area right above the Mandara huts. Completely different kind of scenery.
We stopped for lunch at the Mandara huts and fed the ravens leftover bread. We still didn't have very robust appetites.
Try that next. Yeah, that's why we were wondering how much you'd try and get in. They got these huge beaks.
A few more miles of walking through the rainforest brought us to the official park entrance, which is at the Marangu Gate.
Okay, we have arrived at the Marangu Gate, looking up toward the gate that you come through, and a little series of signs here. This one is for Hans Meyer, who was the first guy to climb all the way to the top. They say the first European, but I do not think the Africans ever climbed Kilimanjaro. And some points to remember. Looking down toward the park entrance.
At the park entrance, you tell the ranger what point you climb to, and he records it in a book and gives you a certificate. Briana wanted to make sure her certificate showed that she got up to Uhuru Peak before I did, but I was just glad mine said Uhuru Peak at all. We got our certificates laminated at the gift shop for $3. Took a last look around the Marangu Gate area and went back to our van, which was waiting to take us back to the Springlands.
Okay.
22
We're
people
on
in
our
this
way
6
back.
passenger van. Is it really?
20 people in our 10-passenger van. Do we have all of us? That's the real question.
Yes.
The porters, along with their funk, joined us on the trip back to Moshi. At this point, we loved them too much to really care. Stanislav the dictator and Godless our guide and all of the porters have their dreams too. The difference is that by accident of birth, we get to have more of ours come true.
Kilimanjaro, mlima mrefu sana. Kilimanjaro, Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro, mlima mrefu sana. Na mawenzi, na mawenzi, na mawenzi. Na mawenzi, mlima mrefu sana. Na mawenzi, na mawenzi, na mawenzi. Na mawenzi, mlima mrefu sana. Ewe nyoka, ewe nyoka, ewe nyoka. Ewe nyoka, mbona wanizunguka? Wanizunguka, wanizunguka, wanizunguka. Wanizunguka, wataka kulila nyama. Kulila nyama, kulila nyama, kulila nyama. Kulila nyama, mbona wanizunguka? Kulila nyama, kulila nyama, kulila nyama. Kulila nyama, mbona wanizunguka?
Press to record. Is it going?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. go.
Just another day up.